Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Thursday. Thursdays at 3. I know last time it was like Tuesdays at 2. I don't know. I'm keeping it spontaneous, I think. Well, thank you for joining us today on Under the Hood. This week, we have a very special guest. Maybe I'm a little biased, but we have my manager from Fletcher Artist Management. We have Sarah Fraser joining us here in a second. And yeah, I'm really interested, again, for a reminder, this season we're talking about people who've been in the business for a little while who maybe have even served different roles in this industry. And I think today we're going to get to find out a little bit about that, to see how things were like when they first entered the industry, how things have changed up until now, and then moving forward, ideas to come. So let's see if we can, and every time I do this, I'm looking at this thing and I'm like, okay, how do I invite, oh wait, this is inviting friends to watch. This is bringing someone on. Here we go. Okay. Send invite. I think this is working. Who knows? Third time's a charm. Maybe. Seems like it's working. Hi.
Hello.
Oh my gosh, I love it when technology works.
Amazing.
My apologies if I told you too many times what to do. You're downloading all the recent copies. The first interview that I did of this season using this new Facebook Live format that they came out with their new software, it literally took me like 22 minutes to figure out how to bring my first guest on. And I was like, okay, so both people have to be using mobile devices. Both people have to have the updated app. Both people. Okay. So anyway.
We're doing great. We're doing great.
So far, so good. How are you?
Good. Just, running around.
That's good. Running around is good.
Yeah.
So Sarah, I was saying, this season we're talking a little bit about people who've been in the industry for a little while and what the specifics and what the vibes were sort of when you first got started. And I'm really interested in knowing the different roles that you've played throughout the different, phases of your life in this industry. And then talking about how things have changed up until now, and then moving forward, what are we, looking for? How are things changing? And what do we all need to sort of be prepared for?
Yeah.
So how did you initially get involved with music or opera or singing, or what was your journey like?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to have a sip of this iced coffee at my Tasuki Village Market, first of all. So shout out.
Yep.
I was like, big topic requires an iced coffee. So I was, my grandmother was like the choir music, head of the choir, all of that. So I always grew up around music. Also, fun fact, my father, my grandfather, and my two uncles, their voices formed a natural barbershop quartet.
Oh, nice.
So they toured around the state of Kansas doing barbershop. So music was no stranger to our family. However, I'm the first person who ever attempted to do anything, professionally with it. Earning, some interesting, comments from my parents, of course. They're like, you want to do what in college? I'm like, I know. No, so in high school, I started taking voice lessons with Vern Yenny at Wichita State. And then, of course, that was like where I decided to go and do my bachelor's. And then the long story short, and that I've told to like some people when I do master classes and stuff, is that I actually had a surgery on my lower back the summer after my summer of my sophomore year. And when they intubated me, they used too large of a tube. So I had some like temporary vocal damage.
Oh, wow.
That I had to work through. And here I was, this, sophomore, junior in college who couldn't really sing. And, like that's my major, what I thought I wanted to be doing.
Right.
And I look back on it now and I'm like, I think I was depressed. I think that was what was going on then, not being able to do that. And the woman who was the head of the opera department at Wichita State then, Marie Allen King, she knew. She was like, why don't you come and assistant direct The Marriage of Figaro with me? And that was like the light bulb moment that I was like, oh, I'm supposed to be on the other side of the table. I'm supposed to be doing this over here. And eventually everything got all sorted out, and started studying with my other voice teacher, Deborah Baxter, and finished the voice degree. But by that point I was like, I know that that's not ultimate, like performance is not going to be the path for me.
Right.
So I went and got a master's down in stage directing down at Florida State.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so
Was
I
that
mean,
with Matthew Lotta? Was he there?
yeah,
Oh, okay,
yeah.
okay.
And then Doug Fisher is the head of the program, until recently. Like both he and Matthew have like just retired in the last couple of years, which is crazy. They've been there for
Wow.
quite a while.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Matthew was the head of the opera directing program, and he would only, I mean, they only at that time admitted like one person per year
Oh, wow.
into that program. So there were only ever two of us in there at the same time. Stephanie Havey was one who was there right before me, who's now like off doing
Yeah.
amazing things.
Yeah.
Corinne Hayes was also in that program, and now she's off in Maryland. She's like teaching and also still directing a lot. So a lot of people have had a lot of success in that program, and it was very hands-on. If it was only ever two of us in the program at a time,
I can't even imagine. Yeah.
directing, and a lot of folks who now I work with, like Alex Elliott, who's on the roster
There
and
you
was
go.
at FSU when I
That's
was
right.
there. So it's been really
Okay.
cool to see his career develop, and now like we're kind of aligned once again in this way, which is really fun.
Yeah.
And then
So you
then
finished your master's in stage directing, and then what was your next step
yeah.
after that?
So I finished the degree. I moved back home to Kansas, and then started freelancing as like a director, stage manager, assistant director, sort of whatever I could get
All
my
of the
hands
above.
on. All of the above, quote, other duties as assigned. So I
Yeah, that's
um,
yeah.
I worked at Central City. I did several summers with the Castleton
Oh,
Festival,
yeah.
RIP, pour one out, Maestro Mazel, which was the most magical of all places, between the menagerie and the zonkey that lived there, and just this like all, it was a magical, magical couple of seasons there. But
Wow.
so I freelanced quite a bit, and then I moved to New York with my best friend, her boyfriend's best friend, and our like two cats and a dog, and it was a total sitcom.
Right.
Um, and then about 6 months into moving into New York, Sam Snook,
Yeah.
who's now head of vocal for IMG London, is my best friend from undergrad. He and I met the same day, moving into the dorms
Aw,
at Wichita State. We
that's
had the same
amazing.
voice teacher, same voice studio, everything, and have been very close friends ever since.
That's incredible.
He was like, I know you're looking for part-time work to offset the directing career and all of that. This guy named Alex, this young guy, just started a company, and he's looking for part-time help, and I think you should submit your application. So I went to the Opera America website, submitted the application. Alex got in touch with me. We wound up having a coffee interview that wound up being like 2 hours
Hmm.
long. And the next day, the offer came in. And actually, today is the 12-year anniversary of my official start at FAM.
Well, happy anniversary.
Yeah. I'll say
That's amazing.
cheers. Cheers.
Yeah, absolutely. That is such an interesting story, and how I'm certain that each one of those disciplines along the way has always been a part of what has helped cue you into like eventually what you're doing now, and to kind of get to that place. I mean,
Oh, for sure.
how incredibly helpful is it that you know all of those different disciplines? That's I didn't know that you had had all of those experiences.
Yeah.
So
I
that's
mean,
incredible.
being an artist manager really is one of those weird things that you don't go to school to study that specifically. You don't
Right.
manage in your major in artist management. And so it's all like everybody who gets into this has a very circuitous sort of
Right.
route.
Right.
Either they were a singer, or, maybe an arts admin, or maybe just an opera super fan that then found
Right.
their way into it. So, I mean,
Right.
there's no one way to do that, which has always been really kind of cool, and also challenging in some ways, because you're like, well, I guess we just have to pick some of this up as we go along because we've never done it before.
That's true.
So, there's
Yeah.
been some trial and error definitely for Alex and me over the years, just and
Oh,
learning
sure.
from colleagues who've come before to be like, hey, Do you know what we're supposed to do in this country with this, visa or, something like that? And now we're thankfully in a place where I think we are able to share some of that knowledge with some of the artists, younger artist managers who are starting out now and, are able to come to us for some guidance when they need it. So
Well, yeah,
it
I
feels
thought
nice
that
to
was
share
so
that.
cool. I thought it was so cool during the pandemic how it seemed like all the boutique agencies kind of came together and were meeting, even some of the bigger ones as well, I guess, were meeting
Yeah.
on calls, on Zoom stuff, and sharing what they were doing. And, I mean, the little bit of it that I saw, I'm sure that it helped having that sort of network. And again, it's also nice to hear from a singer standpoint that, we as singers, before we ever get management, it seems like this far stretch or something of like, unless you have like a best friend who can kind of cue you
Right.
into what's going on. But so often it's like you don't go to school, or oftentimes in school, you don't necessarily learn about what it is. I'm sure the most common question you ever get is like, how do you know when it's time for
Oh,
management, right? It's like,
yeah.
how do you get a manager and what does a manager do? And well, the reason why everybody has those questions is because nobody knows,
I know.
or at least most people, I
I
think.
mean, stuff like that
But so
never
it's nice to hear
got talked
that
about
sometimes
at my undergrad.
managers don't know either.
Yeah. No, I mean, stuff like that just never got spoken about at my undergrad. And it was just this I mean, the whole career in general was something that seemed very sort of almost unattainable in some
Right.
ways. It seemed like this far off, distant sort of thing, which I mean, it's kind of funny considering some of the people that did go there, like Joyce
Oh,
DiDonato,
yeah.
Alan Held,
Yeah.
Sam Raimi, all these people who went to Wichita State and have had, I would say okay careers,
Sure. Sure. Something to
but
aspire to.
there's like a level of demystifying that I think still has to happen at sort of the undergrad university
Yeah.
level, as people are starting to figure out like if this is maybe a viable career path for them,
Right.
then what that actually looks like.
So so getting into this next little segment, from the time that you got started, and you can choose whether you, let's say, got started, on your path of thinking that you were going to be a stage director, or in your path of being stage management, or with artist management, or all three. How has things changed from when you first began until like how things are sort of operating now?
Mm.
Oh, yeah, Gracie wants to know too.
Oh, hi. Excuse me. This is the highest my voice has sounded in like 2 weeks now because of all the allergies and stuff. Like I could have sung like Old Man River in the original octave last week. It was
Sure.
not pretty. So
Yeah.
we're getting there. Um, I mean, the use of technology in all ways has been probably one of the biggest changes, especially I think for all of my friends who are in stage management or stuff like that. Like the fact that people are using digital scores sometimes to call a show and they put all of their cues in there. Like my little um my little old fashioned heart could never. I'm too much of a Luddite where, like I want a physical
You got to
paper
have
book and all of
a
that.
giant
I
notebook
also
with all
just
the
don't
keys.
trust technology to not completely go awry at the worst possible moment.
Yeah.
So I don't know that that could ever be for me, but for my friends who do that, I'm like, good for you. I'm glad they're organized on that sort of level. Also, the amount of paper contracts that we got in the beginning and then like we almost never get those anymore, thankfully. It's such a relief to not have to go and like check the mailbox all the time to be like what contract came in, and now I have to
Right.
physically scan all of these so we have a copy and then send them back out, and then the artist will, excuse me, send them back to us, and then we have to send it back to the company, and then they'll send Agma a copy, and then they'll send us a copy, and it's just to not have to deal with all of that sort of admin work is so nice. It's so
Physical hard
nice.
copies of headshots being
Oh my
reproduced.
God.
I
Even
mean,
for a few years after I started working with Alex, we would occasionally get like a CD in the mail and somebody's headshot and resume in like a big manila envelope. And I'm like, I will look at this, but why? It
right.
could have been an email.
Yeah. I definitely think technology, that's superstar A plus. That's probably changed the most since I've been in the industry as well. It's like, how easy is it to now just, like you said, scan things, email things, go to somebody's website to pull their stuff or whatever it is you
I
need.
think it's also been really really great for the more boutique agencies because some of these bigger places like the big three that used to be the big three, that power was very centralized where they had these big office presences in New York City. It was easy to go and have meetings and do all of this stuff, and you just pick up the phone and go chat with somebody over at Lincoln Center, that sort of thing.
Right.
And now with the advent of email, internet, etc., Zoom, we have all these ways to communicate with the same companies that, the bigger companies have had access to in some ways, like more easily in the past. And so
Yeah.
now, in some ways, it's really leveled the playing field where even these, there's a lot of boutique agencies that have, some very heavy hitters and are definitely like artistry wise on par with some of the like the big agencies.
Yeah.
And we're able to have these relationships with companies that might not have been as easily accessible 15 years ago. And for that, I'm very grateful. And it's also so nice to have like an email paper trail of things to just be like, oh yep, search, I did say that in 2018 and blah blah blah,
Right.
that sort of thing. Rather than again having to print everything out or have
Right.
paper records of stuff. So I'm very thankful for that. And especially now with some of the like tracking software programs that, various companies have, like what we use for everybody's calendars and
All
stuff
right.
like that. It makes things so much easier just to keep track of everything. And just definitely saves us a little bit of bandwidth for sure.
From the outside as a singer, looking in, that's been one of the biggest changes. I mean, I signed with Cami as my first agent, with Ken Benson and Michael Benchetrit 21 years ago,
Oh my
like right
goodness.
now, basically, right before I went to Aspen. And I remember that like boutique agencies, there was Jack Mastriani had his agency, and Neil Funkhauser had his agency, which
Hmm.
Alex was an assistant for back in those days.
Yeah.
But like I didn't know too many other boutique agencies that had like a presence. It really was just Cami and IMG and ICM that became Opus 3. But so yeah, and now it seems like there's just so many, and that they're all really, really thriving and doing great under their own umbrellas,
Yeah, it's
Which,
been really great to see, you know, some of the folks from, Cami, et cetera, who then eventually split off
yeah,
and have, created their own boutique agencies and, during the pandemic. And, again, we've had all those little manager groups and stuff to chat about things during the pandemic, especially things like pay, payment installments, et cetera, for contracts, dividing those up. So that way, everybody's not getting everything at closing night. And,
yeah,
a lot of other conversations about, how we can make things better for artists. But it was neat to see then some of those folks who were part of those big agencies start their own things, some of which it was a little bit more from the ground up than others.
yeah,
But it's been really great to see everybody thrive, which is nice.
a hundred
There's a
percent.
lot of talent out there that needs quality management. It's hard. I wish we could, have triple the amount of folks on the roster that we do, but it's about having the amount of bandwidth for each person, that makes sense.
I wonder,
So
I wonder
it's
if you can talk a little bit about that. Like, so with different, I mean, I'm sure it's different for each agency, but like speaking with you and Alex, like, how do you, there's 50 some odd people, I think, on the roster. How is that divided up? Do people take different people, or do you have, do you have your own roster and he has his, or do you both share everybody, or how does that work?
I mean, it's a little bit of, we're all kind of monitoring everything else. Jeff, who's come
Yeah,
on in the last year and a half, is so wonderful. And like he has picked everything up so incredibly quickly. Could not be happier to have him as part of the fam. Been able to take on a little bit more bandwidth. Like we've been able to have him be negotiating some contracts and stuff, which is
oh, that's
really
great.
exciting. Like he's really picked up everything in stride and is doing an amazing job, which then helps free up a little bit of space for Alex and me as well. And we've been able to then add a few people to the roster. The way that all sort of divides, it's not, there's only one person that is my specific person, and I can talk about that. But Alex and I both have, it's all sort of depending on who has relationships with certain companies, or who maybe like the relationship has just sort of organically developed where I'm in contact with this artist more frequently, or Alex is in touch with this person more frequently, rather than being like, I'm going to take XYZ person and have my own roster, and we're all monitoring each other's email anyway. So it's like,
Yeah.
if I'm out of town, Alex picks something up, and vice versa.
Right.
Um, and then right before the pandemic, Alex was like, as part of your professional development, I want you to go out and I want you to, audition, whatever. I want you to bring somebody on the roster that you are going to be the primary person for, and, let you have it. And that was Limmy.
All right, let me pull you.
So, and I think that's going okay. So,
Yeah, yeah, very much so. Very much
so
so.
yeah.
Incredibly proud of every single person on this roster. I mean, every time I see it, it's just like everyone's blowing up in such a great
Yeah.
way. It's so good. So,
It's a really good group.
yeah,
I'm biased,
post
but
pandemic, since you brought that up, like, everyone hears all these different kinds of, doom and gloom sort of talk about the industry, going away or whatever. And then on the flip side, you see these incredible announcements of like seasons that are so incredibly diverse, and like it's sort of like, so from your perspective, what do you see happening now, that is of note, or important for people who may be watching this, or in the singer realm or in the manager and or whoever? What do you think is important to keep in mind for now?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different things going on. Some are great, some are more challenging. I do find that, post-pandemic, when everybody was like, we're open again, that, people really tried to go big, but maybe the audiences weren't fully back in the way that like companies needed to support that financially. So
Mhm.
I find that some companies are kind of like, we're pulling back a little bit because they're like, we might have gone a little too hard in the beginning. And some companies, they're doing some smaller productions, or maybe they're doing an opera in concert rather than like a fully staged thing, which obviously requires a much larger budget. So there's a fair amount of that going on into this next season. So in some ways there are some fewer opportunities happening, but a lot of companies are still going very strong, and they're very committed to programming things and doing stuff in their communities. And I think that's the important thing to remember. There is some retooling that's happening right now, but then there are some companies that are doing really wonderful things that are, they're finding ways to, really integrate themselves into their communities, and are having a lot of success, either doing, some of the stalwart traditional shows, or they're doing more, innovative newer works that really kind of depends on what works for the community. I think places like Des Moines, like shout out Michael Eagle, like the programming is incredible. They're doing so well. Like all of those, it's a smaller theater, of course, but like every single show in the summer is sold out. The quality of productions so high, and they're really like becoming part of, the community in not just Indianola, but Des Moines, and it's really becoming a destination. Like, who would have thought the middle of Iowa would be like a destination for opera? And I can say that as somebody from Kansas, like the ultimate, like so shocked and surprised by that. But they're really really doing amazing things out there, and I think hopefully it's something that maybe can't be copied per se, but can be inspiration for
Sure.
some other companies that are trying to figure out like how they can maybe become a better part of their community, strengthen those ties. Because I think that's a big part of it. Iowa is very much into, like music education. They're developing audiences, like starting from the very beginning. And I think that's hugely important, especially, and also in places like Houston, like the HGO
Yeah.
like going around into schools there. And they're like, not just doing, like a little like outreach Hansel and Gretel, like they're doing really interesting stuff in the communities. And I think that's part of the difference.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I've always been a big fan of DMMO. That was my first paid apprenticeship. I was an apprentice
Oh,
artist there in 1996, and I think we got $220 every other week. But
Mm.
it was such a cool experience. And I remember Robert Larson leading the gang, and back then we did everything in English, but it was such a cool stage with all those bombs that kind of go underneath, and
Yeah,
and the orchestra is kind of set in the middle between the proscenium and the
it's
playing
really
circle in the front.
unique.
You can do really cool things. Speaking of that production, I think Christian Van Horn and oh shoot, I can't remember who the soprano was that did Bluebeard's Castle with
Oh,
all those
Was it
projections.
Sarah
Oh yeah,
Gardner?
maybe that
Oh,
was cool. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It was maybe one of the coolest looking things I had ever seen
It
in the
looked
opera world.
phenomenal.
I mean, I don't know if you ever saw that virtual reality Cal Albertson thing where he sang Scarpia, and it was like it was on
Yeah.
Star Wars Planet or something. That
Yeah,
was pretty
yeah,
cool too. But every once in a while you look at something, you're like, what is this? And I just, knowing that theater and that stage, I was like, how are they able to make, and of course with projections,
yeah.
technology, it's kind of incredible what people are able to do. So that's exciting.
I'm very excited for this summer. I think it should be another good one. I mean, we also have Chaz out there
Oh,
directing this summer, and he usually does about one show per summer out there, and they're just the most visually stunning, engaging things ever.
yeah.
And so he's directing the Peleas, and I think that's going to
Oh,
be
nice.
phenomenal.
That'll be
It's going to
great.
be the most beautiful thing you've ever seen.
Wow, that's cool. That's really, really cool. So, as we sort of look forward from where we are now, um, do you find hope in this art form? Do you find, I mean, not to get too but like, let's say this, what are some of the things that we can look forward to? What are some of the things that we as artists need to think about? What are some of the things that um, our entire community needs to try to focus more towards?
God. Okay, I'm gonna have to have another sip of coffee while I think
Drink
about
your
this one.
coffee. Drink your coffee.
mm.
I think
I
from the
mean, I think
singer
this.
side, what I'm trying to make of myself and my students, I see everyone obviously, and I think to sell tickets and to be more, I don't know, less, I don't know what I'm saying, like to include more musical theater shows in opera
Yeah.
seasons. And so doing that cross training of making sure that you're not just going in with the traditional stuff, but that you are able to offer something that age appropriate, whatever character appropriate, voice type appropriate, that would fit in those ideas that companies are doing. But
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interest in from companies in artists who can really showcase like a multifaceted version of themselves. Like whether that, it doesn't have to just be like, oh, I sing, this mezzo repertoire and that is my identity, but like do they have an interest in, something else? Do they also like to do, flamenco music, or do they also like to do music theater? And, companies are really finding interesting ways to showcase how artists are these multidisciplinary storytellers,
mhm.
and I think that's a really cool thing, and I also think audiences love that because it reduces the distance where it's like the opera singer is this lofty, elevated, the person with the Viking helmet
Sure.
and all of that, and like, oh no, they're a real person who is an incredible artist and is, telling an incredible story, and that's, I think, what ultimately appeals to people, right?
Yeah. I mean, somebody you already mentioned who has done that so incredibly beautifully is Joy Stevanato. All of those individual
Yeah.
projects that he's created has just been like some of the most unique and thought-provoking and artistic experiences. And I don't know who's behind all of that, if it's her and a team of producers or what, but it's amazing to see that being done.
Yeah, and I think it's a good reminder to artists that like you don't have to, fit this one mold and this one ideal of what you and, the Fach or, whatever you need to do, but like people would rather see you be an interesting, unique artist with like an individual perspective and point of view and are able to tell a well-rounded, well-crafted story. Like I would take that any day, even if something isn't maybe the most technically perfect thing you've ever seen. I would rather watch an incredible storyteller than hear the most, like robotic note by note,
Right,
aria you've ever
right,
heard.
right. Yeah, that makes sense. um, so Are there different strategies that you see producing organizations making right now that have you seen one or two or three that you've been like that people need to be doing more of that from the producing side?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think there's some companies that I think really tried to lean into the we are going to there's sort of a couple of different schools where it's we're gonna stick to the tried and true. We're gonna do, X, Y, we're gonna do a bohem and it's gonna be a rental and we're gonna put it together in 5 days and that's what we're gonna present. I don't think that those sorts of productions are always going to be successful in this
Right.
environment because people can sense when you slap something like that together in 5 days.
Yeah.
People can tell that like there wasn't effort or thought put into it and we're just trying to bang this out to make as much money as possible. Like the audience is not going to have a good experience. I mean, it might be nice. Yeah, like it might be very enjoyable, but
Sure.
they'll be like, "Cool, I saw that. Guess I don't need to see
Right.
another opera or, I don't need to come back and see this company do something else because it was fine, but like
Right.
is fine good enough?"
Right.
Um and then I also see some companies, they're like, oh, we're gonna do Bohem, but we're gonna set it in some crazy place. And, that might again, the novelty might get somebody in the door, but if it's, not well produced or well sung, then again, it might be like, okay. So
Mm-hmm.
there's definitely like a middle ground that, some places are finding better than others. Um, I will rave about this until the day I die, but the Tristan and Isolde I saw in Santa Fe 2 summers ago changed my life. It was a pretty traditional staging. It was very minimal, but the singing and the storytelling was just so good and so clear. Also, shout out to Tammy Wilson for singing the Liebestod at 12:40 in the morning. Um, it was it was the best thing I've ever seen in my entire life.
Wow.
It was so good. And
Wow.
also just like the way the set opened up as she was singing the Liebestod and it's Santa Fe. So like all you see was that starry night sky
Wow.
in the background as she then finished the Liebestod and like turned during the play out and it was just slowly walking up and off the stage into the darkness. It it was so simple and yet so effective. And I think sometimes that we can forget that like yeah, projections may be great and all that, but again, if they're not really really well done and they just look like they were made in Windows 93 or something, um
Right.
like the old screensaver sort of
Oh
thing,
yeah.
if it looks like that, again, not gonna appeal to the audience. So like you can't necessarily use the projections or the technology as just like a way to save some money, right? Because it's like, oh, then we don't need to buy a set. But again, if it looks like a Windows screensaver, that's not going to appeal to the
Well,
audience
I'm sure
either.
the good ones are expensive. I mean, I know that intellectual property must cost a
Yeah,
pretty
it's not going to be, it's not really going to save you that much compared to doing something on like an actual set. Like
penny.
at what point you have to do that cost benefit analysis. But I'm like, I would rather see something a little bit maybe more traditional on like a rented set that has really great storytelling, rather than like something with just bad projections in the background.
Right. Right. Right.
Like which one do you think the audience is actually going to like more?
Yeah. Yeah. No, I hear you. That's an excellent point. What are your thoughts on symphony orchestras doing more staged productions? I'm sorry, semi-staged or concert versions of operas in their seasons?
Love it.
Yeah.
Love it. Full big fan. I think it becomes tricky with some repertoire where you're like, man, I really would like to see some staging right about now.
Right. Right.
I
Right.
think, like a Peleas or something like that. Like beautiful music, absolutely stunning, but also there is a visual element that I think needs to happen sometimes with some productions. Otherwise it's just kind of like, ooh, this has
Right.
been going on for a while and is starting to wear on me. But I think that's why we have some of those semi-staged elements, then it can actually be very successful. So like if more symphonies want to do more opera, I fully support that.
Yeah. Totally. Well, yeah. Sure. Sure. Well, uh, I guess we've covered all the different eras and I'm kind of yeah. I think we all are doing everything we can to stay in tune and to keep doing the best that we can to keep everything going at the highest levels of artistic product that we have in our own, I don't know, lanes or categories, as it were. But it's so cool to hear and learn more about you. So I really want to appreciate you coming on here and talking about it and telling your story.
Oh, thanks,
And
Lester.
yeah, no. Do you have any questions for me? Or I guess if there's people watching, it's tricky with these lives. Um, what I find happen is that, do it in the afternoon or whatever, people will watch it later and then I'll post it on YouTube as well.
Ah,
So people
nice.
can view those things. But during the pandemic, obviously a lot of people had a lot less to do. And so we were getting like in the moment, questions and so forth. But I'll definitely keep you posted about stuff. But
Yeah.
thanks again. I really appreciate this.
Yeah, anybody's always happy. I'm happy to answer any questions if people, will shout out either through you, through me,
Well, I
especially if
think
it
that's
is about
that
management.
is
I know it's weird. So,
well, yeah, but I mean, I think specifically with both you and Alex and Jeff, the the openness that you all present yourselves not only to your artists but to the entire industry, I think is palpable. And I think that you guys are very strong in leading the way of like it doesn't have to be hidden in the back room with the password to get in through the
yeah.
speakeasy, through the phone booth or whatever. It's like, just reach out and we'll talk to you about it. And
I definitely think that is something that has shifted in my 12 years. I mean, Alex, of course, has always been, very transparent, but I think, and I've obviously learned a lot of that from him. But
yeah,
just watching the industry, I think on the whole, develop a little bit more of that. And there's a much more collaborative nature, not just between managers. I think that has definitely shifted some, but also between companies that I think there might have been sort of an old school mentality where it was like we're gotta hash this out and
right.
that sort of thing when it came to negotiating. But like honestly, it's just for us, it's more about building relationships with companies because at the end of the day, we all want to make the best art possible. We want to get the best deal for our artists, make sure our artists are as comfortable as they can be in any engagement that they go off to, make sure that they have like the most beneficial circumstances, all of that. And, we're not trying to screw companies over or
Right,
anything, like
right.
that's not what it's about. We're just trying to collaborate with companies to make the best art possible. And that is something that I definitely think has maybe shifted, even since the pandemic. I think
Yeah,
that the approach in the industry has become a lot more collaborative. And so I'm very thankful for that.
yeah. Well, that's beautiful. I love
Yeah,
that. I think that the stronger the team is, stronger everybody else is on the team. So
exactly.
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I hope you have a great rest of your Thursday, and I'll get this loaded up.
Thanks.
And thank you again. I really appreciate
Oh,
it. It's great talking
great.
with you.
Yeah, I'm glad that I got the invite. So thank you.
Absolutely. All right. We'll talk soon. Thanks so
All right.
much.
Sounds
All
good.
right. Bye.
Bye.